in the future. There are no people. There are no people in the future. No people at all. There are no people in the future. Where did all my people go? There are no people in the future. Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey, everybody, welcome. It is Friday, December 16th, 2022. Welcome to Raging Chicken's Friday Politics Roundup. This is Kevin Mahoney, creator and founder of Raging Chicken. Each week we break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. And sorry for the little late start there. We had some weird stuff happening with our intro music and stuff. So they're there. Welcome, Nick. How you doing? Yeah, you can help support this show by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. Just head on over to patreon.com/rcpress. You can also help out the show by heading over to our YouTube channel if you're not there already. Smash that subscribe button, like the stream for this show, and hit that notification bell so you know every time that we go live. And welcome to all our new subscribers. We had a whole slew of new subscribers this week, new listeners. Welcome to the show. We also want to say, look, we're drawing the line in the sand. We're not going to let Paul Martino and his oligarch friends buy our schools and push extremist politics in our community. Raging Chicken has teamed up with Levelfield to launch a truly community-rooted PAC to invest in organizing, supporting local and statewide progressive candidates, and unmasking the toxic organizations injecting our communities with right-wing extremism. We're putting small dollar donations to work to beat back the power of big money. You can get more information and drop your donation at ragingchicken.levelfield.net. And it's a big year for this, and this is why we're kind of pushing it extra now. This is going to be a big school board election year. So when people stop paying attention so much, because there's not big stakes like national or statewide elections going on, but it's all about the local, and that's where all the action has been for the past couple of years. So we're getting into it. On today's show, Biden signs a bill protecting same-sex and interracial marriage rights. Yes, the new law codifies the right to marry for same-sex and interracial marriage or interracial couples. The move became a priority after Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas put targets on the rights in his concurring opinion in the Dobbs decision. That's the one that overturned Roe v. Wade. God, my head is a little fried today. Weird. And this past weekend, white nationalists, Euro ultra-nationalists, and right-wing Republicans met up in New York City for the New York Young Republican Club's gala, calling for total war against their designated enemies. I kid you not. The group's president, Gavin Wax, said, quote, "We want to cross the Rubicon. We want total war. We must be prepared to do battle in every arena, in the media, in the courtroom, at the ballot box, and in the streets. This is the only language the left understands, the language of pure and unadulterated power." At that same event, Marjorie Taylor Greene reflected on the January 6th insurrection, saying, quote, "I will tell you something. If Steve Bannon and I organized that, we would have won. Not to mention, it would have been armed." Just a little setting the tone for 2023, folks. And another attendant there, just to kind of trying to solidify their kind of new right-wing credentials, Newsweek made a big presence there. Yes, as they continue to become the right, I don't know if they're trying to go for this is the respectable forum for ultra-right or right-wing folks. I don't know. What's happening with Newsweek is just crazy. I got to have someone on to just talk about what has happened to that publication over the past couple of years. It's been pretty remarkable. Not to mention, by the way, that Newsweek donates papers to schools, it's called like the Newsweek Youth or something like this, or Newsweek for Kids or something like this. And I gotta start looking into seeing if this right-wing stuff is starting to make its way into those publications that are going into public schools. So we shall see. Anyways. And Elon Musk suspends at least 8 journalists and the @ElonJet account from Twitter for posting what he calls basically assassination coordinates for him and his family. Man, how big does your head got to be? I don't know. Most of the reporters who were banned had been covering Musk's his rule change, banning live location information, presumably because the @ElonJet account was posting publicly available flight data for Musk's private jet. Ah, the power of ownership. I guess he didn't like the fact that, his kind of supposed commitment to, a future of clean energy and all this stuff is kind of running smack dab against his own personal desires for, space and to fly his personal jet wherever he wants to go. Well, whatever. And a couple local news for this end of the semester year. Students at Westchester University are organizing around housing after students received letters saying that their spots in their public university-owned dorms, well, they're not going to be available. No, but private dorms at double the cost will be. Yes, pretty crazy. And thank you, Nick, for that tip. Thank you, Nick, for that tip. It's been pretty crazy. We'll talk a little bit about that. And I know it's this happened kind of a couple weeks ago, but it was a great article in the Bucks County Beacon basically highlighting how Temple University has launched a new center to combat racism, anti-Semitism, and LGBTQ plus bigotry and xenophobia. Pretty cool to see that basically Temple is going in the opposite direction that we see happening in other colleges and universities. So good on you. And for more PA Progressive Talk, tune into the Rick Smith Show's live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern on his YouTube channel, Twitter, Facebook, wherever you get your streams, and subscribe to his podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Head on over to thericksmithshow.com for the latest across all his platforms. And you got to check out the Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast. The amazing PA women stirring the political cauldron behind this podcast rock the house, and they know where the bodies are buried. Make sure to follow them on Twitter at the Night Caucus. That's at the Night Caucus on Twitter. And subscribe to their podcast on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts. And for all you gamers out there, yes, the holidays are here. Well, the Game Inn, that's with two N's, the Game Inn is a Quakertown-based black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show, and they've got everything from retro N64s, the latest consoles, video games for all platforms, collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops, walls of Funko Pops. And kids get discounts when they get A's at the report card. How can you beat that? Check them out on their Facebook page. Follow them on Twitter at the Game Inn. That's with two N's. Got a question about a game, looking for something hard to get? Shoot them a message or drop them an email at thegameinpa@gmail.com. And a shout out goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at Song of Dayman, again with two N's, at Song of Dayman on Twitter. And this coming Monday at Out the Coop Live, yet it will be our last Out the Coop Live of 2022. And look, we've got a good one for you. What better way to kind of close out this year than to welcome Cyril Michaleko back to the show. Yeah, Cyril Michaleko, the editor of the Bucks County Beacon, will join me once again for a bit of a year in review. We'll look ahead at the year ahead, that kind of thing. Well, you can join us on Monday. We hope that you will join us. We'll join us on Monday at 7 p.m. to close out this year right and put the year to bed, frankly. I don't know about you, but 2022 has not been a good year for me, for whatever. Anyways, if we want progressive future, we need progressive media. Support Pull No Punches Progressive Media today. Become a patron for Raging Chickens for as little as $5 a month. Simply go to patreon.com/rcpress. Look, we're here for the fight, but we need you. Become a patron for the price of a good beer once a month. Help keep the media in the movement and the movement in the media. Become a patron for as little as $5 a month by going to patreon.com/rcpress today. Not ready to become a patron? Hey, look. You can even drop us a one-time donation at paypal.me/rcpress. I mean, come on, that's pretty cool, right? One more thing I wanted to kind of get this shout out, but I was having apparently there's like all sorts of, well, I'll come back to it in a minute. We had a new patron come on, and I want to kind of give her a shout out. But I just want to make sure, but I'll get that back in a second. Sorry. Oh, sorry, I don't know what I'm doing here. But no, thank you, Lyric. We want to welcome Lyric on to the kind of patron show, the patron table, who becomes our latest patron. Thank you so much. And you can be like Lyric and kind of join us here by heading on over to patreon.com/rcpress. Kind of invest in this programming, invest in getting the word out and the coverage of the people that are doing the work on the ground, helping to kind of amplify their message and get it out to kind of so many more people. So thank you, Lyric, for becoming a patron. Ooh, yes, as you can tell, I am a little, once again, a little bit off my game today. This is the last week of my semester, and anybody who has been in education, whether as a student or as a teacher or just lived your life, especially in college, this time of year is crunch time, and I've been on a nonstop grading stint and been pretty much in that grading hole for quite some time. So I'm a little tired. I'm a little ready to kind of turn the page on the semester. But of course, can't quite yet because there are still some stragglers out there. If any of you are listening, get your stuff in. So we can finally put this one to bed. My daughter's homesick today. Had been people getting sick all over the place. Luckily, so far, it doesn't seem that it's COVID. But I'll tell you, it's been the number of people I know have gotten sick just the past couple weeks from COVID or from the flu. It's just been skyrocketing. So be safe out there, everybody. But for today, we're gonna kind of I'll tell you right now, unless I go off on some kind of random tangent, we're gonna keep this one relatively short. But want to touch on a few things. So, this was, thank God for this, right? So I mentioned at the top of the show that Biden signed the Respect for Marriage Act. And that basically enshrined into law the right to marry for same-sex couples and interracial couples. And that became really important, right? I mean, look, frankly, Roe v. Wade should have been enshrined into law like this ages ago, right? Especially when Democrats had like significant majorities, right, in the Senate and the House, but they never did. Rebecca Traister is she's a fantastic writer. She's been covering kind of reproductive rights forever, and she's been one of the loudest voices that's been saying, like, look, for years, look, people need to enshrine Roe into law because the right wing is coming for Roe. And frankly, Democratic Party leadership and frankly a lot of kind of people on the kind of the broad left, the center to the left, who are supportive of reproductive rights, would just kind of poo-poo the whole idea that that Roe v. Wade can go away, because they're like, there's no way they're going to do that. Well, as we know, the Supreme Court did. They overturned Roe v. Wade in the Dobbs decision this past summer, and there were some of the Supreme Court justices were trying to make clear that this applies only to Roe. But Clarence Thomas wrote a separate opinion. It's a concurring opinion, right? Meaning, like, he was in supportive of overturning Roe v. Wade. And he basically laid out the list and said, look, given that what the argument here in Roe is, there's a whole series of other decisions that are now also suspect, right? And there was, and a chief among them was recent decisions to like the Obergefell decision, basically, which legalized same-sex marriage. Basically, he looked at that one. He looked at questions around birth control, questions around kind of interracial marriage. Right, so there's a whole series of decisions that have been made over the past century or so that Clarence Thomas basically put a target on, and this becomes really important. So if you all listened to the show with Garen Bagarian this past Monday, when we were talking primarily about this independent state legislative theory that was basically at the forefront on trial, not on trial, oral arguments were being heard before the Supreme Court this past Wednesday, I believe. That was basically to determine whether or not the state legislators would be able to kind of override election law, and that governors and people would no longer have any role in that, but they could basically set their own rules for like who gets the electors and things like this. That, you know, if you haven't been following that, do check out our show of this past Monday with Garrett McGarry. It was just a great show. But anyways, one of the things we talked about in there is like, you know, there was a decision in Bush v. Gore, right? This was back in the 2000 election. This is the one where there was all sorts of problems with the vote. The vote was extraordinarily close, and everything was coming down to Florida. Who was going to get Florida? Was it going to be Bush or was it going to be Gore? And there were pushes from especially from the right wing, for the Republicans, to basically not count a bunch of votes, right? Or to stop the counting, right? Because they said it's been too long. We need a result, blah, 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 blah. And if you're younger, you weren't around during that time, or kind of remember all that, that's worth really kind of checking out that history. But anyways, the point is here, the vote count kept on going on, and it was going to butt up against some deadlines to getting the results to the electoral college vote. So the question is that do you count the votes or don't you? And it went to the Supreme Court, right? And the Supreme Court basically awarded the election to Bush, right? And in that decision, the Supreme Court, like in the majority opinion, basically tried to say that this is a one-off, that our decision, basically saying that, George Bush is the president, it should never be considered for precedent for anything, right? And they laid out all their arguments about why that they were doing it in that particular case. And Sandra Day O'Connor, who was a, conservative, but, I don't know, center-right kind of judge, afterwards, years later, basically said she voted the wrong way, right? That she recognized that was a mistake to do. What happened in subsequent years is that, the Supreme Court can say whatever they're going to say, but what the right wing began doing is they began bringing a whole series of legal cases, of lawsuits forward that would justify their lawsuits, particularly around election law, would justify their lawsuits using and citing that Supreme Court decision in Bush v. Gore, right? Because once it gets written into that, doesn't matter how they say it, once it gets written that, it's going to be referred to, right? And then in the past, what has happened is like, especially around major cases, what justices will sometimes do is they will mention a series of other cases as a way of kind of like saying these are in a similar kind of category. What Clarence Thomas did in the Dobbs decision, right? He said, okay, yeah, some of the other justices are saying this is specific to Roe v. Wade and it's not applies to other ones. He said basically no. And then he listed the series of cases that would go after things like same-sex marriage. It would go after things like interracial marriage, which is ironic given the fact that he's in an interracial marriage by his terms. So anyways, so that happens. And the only way you can push back against this, and part of the argument has been at the Supreme Court level, is that because the courts should not have decided this should have been legislative action, because they're suggesting that if it's not written into law from the kind of by legislation, then the court shouldn't be deciding this. Again, this is not constitutionally based. This is just this tendency or this trend within in particular kind of right-wing Supreme Court justices to say that if it's not in the original intent of the Constitution, that it can't be. The only other way of kind of making something law is to pass legislation. Well, as I said, the Democrats have refused to kind of enshrine Roe into law. And now that everyone woke up, said, oh, crap, they're going to come after the rest of this stuff, too. So now, to the credit of the Democrats, they recognize that, okay, They're going to lose the House. They've lost the House, I'd say, but the Republicans will take over the House in the spring, and then everything's going to stop. So they said, okay, no, before we kind of surrender the majority to the Republicans, we're going to make sure that we get this passed, and they did. Right, so they passed it. They were able to kind of get enough support in the Senate. Because look, there are some Republicans that do support this. It's not many, but there's some. But they were able to pass it through the Senate, and Joe Biden signed it into law, which is great. Right? My guess is going to be there's probably going to be legal challenges to this too as well, but whatever. So that happens, right? So that's a major, I think, kind of important move that was made here. So kudos to them, but it doesn't mean our work's over. All right, one of the probably the most I don't even know when I say the most, I don't know what I could even say that. I mean, I guess this is kind of a barometer, right? This is, you want to take the temperature of where Republicans are. There's this meeting that took place in New York City. I was in Manhattan at the New York Young Republicans Club. And it was this big gala, it was like this 5-hour event, right, that took place, and had all the who's who of kind of the right wing and so on. It's kind of you had the Marjorie Taylor Greenes there, Steve Bannon was there, you had all these folks, but and frankly, to be honest with you, I don't know the entire history of this place, but multiple. There were multiple reports, right, that came out in some major publications, the New York Times, and there's a great breakdown of what went down for the Southern Poverty Law Centers. They did an article on this called "White Nationalists, Other Republicans Brace for Total War." I mean, you think you would think that this is kind of like, fiction, right? This is the kind of thing that you'd say, oh, this could happen when somebody's kind of, I don't know, making something more extreme than it actually is. But this is actually what happened, right? This is actually what happened. So the lead of it was the president of the New York Young Republicans Club, this guy by the name of Gavin Wax. It was a fairly large gathering. And he said, as I quoted at the top of the show, we want to cross the Rubicon. We want total war. We must be prepared to do battle in every arena, in the media, in the courtroom, at the ballot box, and in the streets. Right? Then he said, this is the only language the left understands, the language of pure and unadulterated power. So you've got that, and you might want to look at that and say, okay, well, maybe he's just being kind of, bombastic for whatever, provocative, whatever. But in attendance at this thing was not only these kind of right-leaning Republicans, but were also kind of out-and-out white nationalists, right? So, for example, there were reporters from Hate Watch who were there, and they said, look, there were the white nationalists, Peter and Lydia Brimelow. They're of this organization called VDARE, right? And we've talked about them on the show before. And here's what VDARE is, and I'm reading from this directly from the Southern Poverty Law Center site. So it was originally established in 1999 by Peter Brimelow. VDARE has provided a crucial bridge between more mainstream anti-immigrant movement and more major players in the Republican Party and the white nationalist fringe. Though the site has declared its mission to be, quote, informing the fight to keep America American, its roster of white nationalist contributors throughout the 2+ decades online belies Brimelow's attempts to paint the site as solely a haven for civic nationalist critiques of American system of immigration. So VDARE has been one of these groups that you've seen a lot of people paying attention to, because it's this move to, basically give a kind of a veil or an air of kind of quote unquote legitimacy to a bunch of much more radical organizations, right? And so they were in attendance, right? Steve Bannon was in attendance, right? And Donald Trump Jr. was in attendance. How about that, right? Not only that, I'm going to read another piece, a little bit more on this from you. This is again from Southern Poverty Law Center. So Republicans publicly lauded members in attendance from an Austrian political party founded by World War II era Nazi Party members. Yeah, we've talked about this on the show before too. Racist political operative Jack Pozabiec, I always get his name wrong, Pozabiak, right? He should stand out. But shared jokes across the table with Josh Hammer, the opinion editor of Newsweek. This is what much about Newsweek. Multiple recently elected GOP congresspeople applauded Marjorie Taylor Greene, who told the New York Young Republicans Club crowd in the event's closing remarks that the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol would have succeeded if she had planned it, and that the insurrectionists would have been armed, as I read at the top of the show. Right? There were also representatives there, so white nationalists such as Brimelow, Avider, and leaders from the extreme far-right European parties like Alternative for Germany. This is the AfD, who German officials have placed under surveillance for their ties to extremism, and the Austrian Freedom Party. They were all there eating and drinking and kind of yucking it up with kind of Republicans here. So basically what has happened here is that Pozabiak, yeah, he's the guy who did the whole kind of Pizzagate nonsense. So what's happening here is that why this is significant, I think why this is given so much coverage, is because, it's been kind of openly recognized for a while. There's an internal kind of war happening within the Republican Party between this kind of really extreme kind of white nationalist, white nationalists in the party that are occupying, positions in Congress right now. We're not talking about just people out there who are on the right wing and are kind of white nationalists, but these are people the Republican Party is now, or they essentially run the ground troops of the Republican Party now, right? These folks that are on the far right. What's I think was I think particularly concerning about this event is that this was coming from the New York's Young Republican Club, right? So what it signals is there's a certain kind of appeal, right, being cultivated among younger Republicans with the far right. Right now, this does not mean that every Republican who is young happens to be on the far right or is a white nationalist, but it does mean that this is running. Now, there was this big thing going back and forth this week about what's his name? Matt Taibbi basically came out and said young people are kind of attracted to the right wing because they're hip or whatever. I mean, I don't know. Taibbi just went off the edge too as well, so I don't know what his deal is. But there's a recognition that what's happening in the Republican Party is that the energy, if you will, is not coming from what had traditionally been the kind of neoliberal Republican Party since the 1950s and 60s, or kind of really the Ronald Reagan going forward, which was like small government, no taxes, corporations rock, right? That doesn't kind of have the energy that it once did. What has the energy now is the racism, right? Is the racism, the America Firstism, right? Which is just another way of saying American racism, and these kind of neo-fascists and these white supremacists. So, what you find at an event like this is you get to learn a lot about the language that they're using to signal to signal their solidarity with each other, or the terms that they're using to describe what they are. So, instead of basically calling themselves white nationalists, they're calling themselves kind of civic nationalists, right? Using words like that sound kind of okay, right? But when you dig down into it, you find that no, these are the recloaked, repackaged neo-fascist and kind of far right folks that we've always seen. So there's this other piece here that I just wanted to read a little bit about because I've been, like I've mentioned at the top of the show, I've been wanting to really dig into what's been happening at Newsweek, and eventually we'll have someone on the show. But Southern Poverty Law Center did a decent job of kind of breaking down some of the things what is going on. So if you don't know this already, I wanted to read this a little bit because this is I thought kind of indicative of a lot of issues that are going on with Newsweek. So, this here, starting in May 2020, after editor Nancy Cooper and chief content officer Diane Kandapa brought political activist Josh Hammer to run Newsweek's opinion section. The 90-year-old publication has emerged as a hub for opinion pieces authored by radical right activists. Newsweek has published the extremist Posabiec, right, same guy, as well as the 2020 election lie pusher Raheem Kassam in recent years. And Hammer has also hosted both of them on his Newsweek branded podcast. The three men sat together talking and laughing at Table 6 during this kind of event this past weekend. When QAnon influencer turned Congressperson Marjorie Taylor Greene took the stage, Hammer stood up and applauded. When she endorsed former President Trump as her 2024 presidential candidate of choice, Posabiec turned to Hammer and grinned. In January, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis invited Hammer on a tour of his office, and the Florida-based Newsweek editor has since hyped DeSantis as a potential presidential candidate. You going to go up there, Joss? Posabiec chided Hammer about Greene's endorsement of Trump, eliciting laughter from the table. A Hate Watch reporter approached Hammer after Greene's speech, made an introduction, and asked if he knew Peter Brimelow of VDare. He's right here, right now, Hammer asked. He's right here, right now? Hammer asked with excitement. I didn't even know he was here, Hammer said of the infamous white nationalist publisher. I'm going to go say hi. The Hate Watch reporter asked Hammer how he got his job at Newsweek, and the opinion editor abruptly stopped talking. He asked the reporter to identify himself again, and when the reporter did, Hammer's expression slackened. He quickly claimed he did not know Peter Brimelow and left. Right? So that gives you some idea about what is actually happening around here. We also saw, there's a recent piece in the Bucks County Beacon about this, about Project Veritas, which was, responsible for, creating all these doctored videos that they sank Acorn kind of several years ago, by this guy, James O'Keefe, right? James O'Keefe was the head of, Project Veritas with deep ties to the kind of right-wing money. But there were multiple figures there in Project Veritas that were at this event too as well. So not only do you have the president of this organization come out and saying we need to kind of have total war across the board, right? But we see people who are actually there at this representing those different kind of factions, right? The media faction, the education faction, the street faction. They're at this kind of one gala, and that's their opportunity to kind of network, right? And there's we talked about the Seven Mountains, right? And this kind of Christian nationalist doctrine. This whole idea about total war against all our perceived enemies that we saw at this event, right, mirrors the same kind of Seven Mountain Christian nationalist stuff that we see, that we've talked about on the show. We've had people on the show to talk about, and that should be concerning too as well. My guess is, and this is, again, I'm just going to put like this part of like end of the year conjecture kind of stuff. My guess is that we're going to see, and this, since it's a quote unquote off year election, things are going to go down to the local level, and we're going to see more of this kind of stuff where there's networking and building relationships across different sectors that are going to be important for maintaining single party minoritarian rule. Right, which is kind of what we were talking a little bit about with Garen Bagarian last week too, as well, or earlier this week on Monday too. So check it out. I told you a little off my game today. I'm just tired. Oh God, yeah, and it's been nothing but kind of insanity coming out of the mouth of Elon Musk, or out of the tweet of Elon Musk. And I guess it's the power of ownership to basically start banning anybody that is critical of you, and that's precisely what he does after firing employees. Now he's basically banning people because they're tracking his jet movements and stuff like this. It's just been absolutely crazy. It's also been interesting to me, though. This is kind of an aside note. I've been over on Mastodon for a bit now, especially after Musk was letting far right people back onto the platform. And it really is a different kind of community over there. And it's been seeing kind of some of the engagement at Mastodon where people are kind of respectful to each other and kind of are posting a whole range of kind of cool stuff. And there's not an algorithm that drives kind of people towards extremism. It's like participating in that space for just a few weeks now. It makes it that much more stark about what was happening at Twitter. This is even before Musk took over, right? Just the what kind of content is gets the most like, how the algorithm works to kind of pop particular kind of content. That's interesting. And so one of the things, this is a very simple difference, right? But instead of having an algorithm that's driving kind of engagement, and generally it's things that are more provocative or things that get more engagement, is that things over in on Mastodon are really kind of hashtag driven, right? Or kind of community driven, which means, that if you want to kind of signal something, by being provocative is not going to get you kind of noticed by itself, but you want to use these hashtags to signal that this is part of this kind of broader conversation. And people are pretty defensive of that place too. They want, people who've been on over a Mastodon for a while really want to keep it as a respectful space. And I guess there's more ability to do so, in part because it's not a big centralized system, right? It's all these kind of decentralized network pods, if you will. But it also means, right, that there's interesting differences. Like, I find the conversations that I'm having, the people that I've kind of connected up with there, even though I may have been friends with them on Twitter, right, or kind of follow them on Twitter, when over on Mastodon, they wouldn't show up on my feeds on Twitter, but over on Mastodon, they're showing up. So that's kind of interesting. I don't know. So I guess I don't like to say that this means X, but I wonder if we're going to see a shift in what's happening on social media platforms in the next few years. Like, if what's happening with Musk and the attention on the abuse of power, right, and the kind of divisive driven algorithms for the past several years, attention on that stuff is going to actually start to reshape what we see on social media. I don't know. I'm a little bit skeptical of that claim, but I'm also, wondering if we're gonna. I don't believe, we're going to find something that is, that's where it's going to rectify and it's going to be this really, really good space. I just think things are going to be in flux, which is why, seeing these kind of media folks together at a far right gala, I should say, like we saw in New York City this past weekend, is a bit concerning, because my guess is that they're talking about this stuff. But anyways, here's that. I want to give a couple quick things here, and like I said, I'll keep today's show fairly fairly tight. But a shout out to Nick Marcel for basically cueing me into what's happening down at Westchester University. And David Becker down at Westchester University, we've had him on the show before. And he had a great Twitter thread that I thought I'd kind of share with you about what's happening at Westchester. So he says, students at my university are organizing around housing on campus. Apparently, students got letters saying their spots in, quote, public university dorms, university-owned dorms, won't be available, but private dorms, which are twice as expensive, will be. And here's some stuff I found about the finance behind this, all right, because this is one of the things we had him on school financing, if you recall. All right, it says the university itself only owns some of the dorm facilities on campus, but over the last decade, an increasing number are owned and managed by an LLC called University Student Housing, or affiliated housing. The University Student Housing, or USH, is a subsidy of the Westchester University Foundation, which is a 501c3 connected to and supported by the university, but for legal and financial reasons is completely separate from the university, which is public. Next, USH controls a pretty sizable portion of university housing, right? And you list the number or the different places that it's controlled by. The students' main complaint now is that there aren't enough public dorms. From what I can tell, the university entered into an agreement with USH in 2013 where it explicitly promised that it would limit the number of public dorm rooms. Right? You get this? So there was an agreement in 2013, right, between the university and this 501c3, which is also, for all practical purposes, part of the university. They're just doing this this is a financial accounting thing, which I'll talk about in a second. but they promised they would limit the number of public available dorms, right? Because basically they want the profit incentive. And this is just a study in the way capitalism works, right? Is that you have a public dorm, right, where students are kind of guaranteed a particular rate, right? But then you have like these private entities which start to get like frustrated because they don't want to just, they don't want to charge what it costs to keep, repairs. They want to charge, what they can so they can get profit from it, right? They want to extract profit from the property, as opposed to a publicly owned dorm, which its goal is to make sure that it covers its cost, right? Make sure there's enough planning for repairs and all this other kinds of stuff. So the way that they did this is they said, okay, we will go ahead and we're going to give you this job to build new housing and manage that, okay, USF, and we will basically say that we're going to limit the number of public dorms. So we're not going to build any more public ones because you want to make sure that you can actually get your profits. And so that's what they did, right? So you go on. The USH got the financing for its buildings through the Chester County Industrial Development Corporation. They sold bonds on the municipal bond market, which are basically loans. In the most recent public loan statement, we find really messed up things. The university agreed to limit use and growth of the public dorms, presumably so the demand for housing would increase and justify increased supply of private housing, as I was saying. The cooperation agreement itself is quite damning. They agreed to reduce the number of public beds by 393 and cap the number of public beds at a total of 5,835. Not only that, but the agreement gives monopoly power to USH and promises them they'll be the only provider of this new housing, even above the university itself. The bottom line is that there was a planned scarcity of affordable student housing. Now, this is the most important point. The bottom line, this is David Becker again, excellent analysis. The bottom line is that there was a planned scarcity of affordable student housing, an agreement written into the financial bones of a new dorm construction on campus that the stock would tend toward the more expensive privately operated dorms. All right. So this is why this is really kind of important. Now the students are organizing there. They're organizing hold on, let me just get the right name for it. You're looking for them on Instagram. It's WCU_housing crisis. That's WCU_housing crisis. This is going to be a really kind of important an important struggle to follow for a bunch of reasons. I want to point something out here too as well, right? And why this becomes important. So in 2013, hold on just one second. In 2013, back when, let me just get this here. I thought this was up. Sorry. Huh. Interesting. Let me see something here. This is interesting. I'm sorry to get distracted like this, but huh. This is fascinating. What just happened? Well, I'll have to. I'm going to have to check this out. There is something that went wrong with this, but anyways, I do have the. So back in 2013, the point was this: I wrote this piece called "Wall Street on the Susquehanna: Poshy Bond Scheme Bleeds Education Budget for Beautiful Buildings." Okay, and the case that we're making, that I was making in 2013, was essentially exactly what was happening here. Exactly what David Becker basically lays out what was happening at Westchester University. I also produced a short documentary with a woman by the name of Colleen Bradley, who was vice president of administration and finance at Westchester University, and was eventually fired for blowing the whistle on exactly the kind of scheme that Becker is talking about here. Right. One of the things that happened, and we tried to, I remember this when this was actually happening at Kutztown, we started to notice weird stuff that was happening with the budget. And there was money that seemed to be missing, but we couldn't find it. The administration was throwing up their hands. And it wasn't until we started to realize, and this is thanks in part because of Colleen Bradley down at Westchester University, is what essentially was going on is that there were some moves that were being made. So what was happening initially, and some of this has changed because there was a legal case that happened at East Stroudsburg University years ago that forced the university to draw a very a clear line between what was happening at the foundations for the universities and what happened at the universities. So technically, what's not supposed to happen, right? What's not supposed to happen is the university and the foundation are not supposed to collaborate and decide about how to kind of, work their finances together. They're supposed to be separate entities, right? They're linked, but they're supposed to be separate and independent, right, by law. But what had been happening at Westchester University, Stroudsburg University, Edinburgh University, Kutztown University, probably more, but California was another big one. What they were doing, right, is they were basically taking money from the basically the education budget of the university, right, and they were transferring some of that money to the foundations, right, where they could use that stuff more freely, and then they would not have to report, right, how they were spending that money on their overall kind of accounting schemes, right? So there were these things where you're kind of saying, well, I don't understand how it is possible that we're in crisis when the number of students we have has increased, that the number of faculty we have has decreased, and so on, right? What Nick was saying here. Nick, what I'm going to give you, there was an issue accessing where it is in Raging Chicken, but here's the I'm putting in the link to where I have it on the AppScuff KU exchange, so you can read it there, and I'll figure out what's happening at our main website over there too as well. But regardless, so we basically tracked what was going on, right? What I think I'll also drop into chat right now too is as well is the link for the Colleen Bradley piece too as well. Let me just search that up really. Yeah, we're going off the rails here, folks. Sorry. So I'm going to just put this into, this is for part 1, but you can get part 2 and part 3 are kind of linked in here too as well. Let's see, I should give it a title, Bradley documentary. So I put a link there in today's, I'll try to remember to put in today's show notes too as well, since I'm talking about it like this. But what we began to find out is that the universities were using this, basically they were having 2 sets of books, and they were doing this thing that was called off-balance sheet financing. And it's essentially what Enron did that eventually sank the company. And think about it like this, and I've gone through this so many times on this show, but I'll do it again really briefly this time. It's basically like this. Like, say, just for the ease of this discussion, say I have $1 million that are coming in, that are in my budget, right? Now, say that I want to, I don't want to have to report all of that money, right? Because I basically want to kind of keep a surplus for myself, right? So because I have ideas as a university president of what I want to do with this university, right? But if I tell everybody that we've got lots of money and lots of extra money, then they're going to demand we spend it on things like, I don't know, education or scholarships or that kind of stuff. But I want to do these other things that are going to better for me because it's going to get me a better job in the future, or maybe I'm ideologically kind of bent towards the kind of like, like neoliberal market, whoever knows what it is, right? Whatever the reasons are. And so I have this project, that's going to a good friend of mine, maybe a big donor to the university, would love to have their name on this kind of new, beautiful plaza, right? So, but I know I'm not going to get funds for that because we keep on hearing about this crisis in higher education and the increasing cost of education and the increase in student debt and all that stuff. So it wouldn't be probably a good move to publicly be able to say, hey, we're going to build a plaza with lots of pretty waterfalls in it, right? So instead, what we're going to do is that on our balance sheet, you're going to get $1 million this year, right? So we're going to take, let's just say, we're going to take 20% of that $1 million, so $200,000. We're going to take that and we're going to stick it in a bank account, right? And so, yes, it's true. We're not going to be able to fund it in year one, but after 5 years of pulling $200,000 out of that, like from that $1 million, that pull that 200,000 after, then we'll have our $1 million, right? So then we'll be able to kind of do this, right? But we don't want to tell everybody we're doing this, because we tell everybody we're doing this, they're going to be like, wait a minute, you keep on saying there's a crisis, that you don't have enough money to buy like updated computers, or you can't hire new faculty, or all this other kinds of stuff. So what you're going to do is that you're going to list it on your accountant forms, right? On your spreadsheets, right? When you're on your ledger, right? You're going to list it there as a cost, right? So the way you're going to write it down is not that, oh, it's just sitting in a bank account. You're going to write it down as an expenditure, right? You write that down as an expenditure, right? And there's nothing wrong. This is not illegal, right? This is legal. It's just unethical. So you write it down as an expenditure. So when somebody's looking at your books, right, it appears that $200,000 is gone, that it's been spent, because you said it's been spent. It's been spent for this thing, right? You name it, whatever it's going to be made. But in reality, it hasn't been spent. It's only been spent in the sense it's been taken out of the education budget and stuck into a bank account for this, like, plaza, right? And this was happening across the Pasha University system, right? And they were doing that kind of thing, this off-balance sheet financing. The documenter I did with Colleen Bradley, who was fired for blowing the whistle on this. She was a vice president of administration and finance at Westchester University. She blew the whistle on this, and basically she lost her job because she was like, this is wrong, right? But she's got all the emails, right? Colleen Bradley she's got the receipts, right? And she basically was able to show that this was not just something happening at Westchester, but this was something that the state Pasha, right, out in Harrisburg, they were telling the individual universities how to do this, right? And why would they do this? Well, it would benefit them because they could have more flexibility in how they wanted to use the money for their purposes. So, and again, I'm not suggesting that they were doing it for personal gain directly. Like, it wasn't like they were pocketing $200,000 to kind of like, get a new house for themselves. They're pocketing $200,000 so that they could kind of like craft this kind of PR version of the university that they wanted to craft, right? That would benefit them because now they're going to be this amazing person who did this amazing thing, whatever. That's what would happen. And they could go to state lawmakers, right? And they could go to faculty members, and they could go to students, and they could say, hey, look, here's our books. We're in deficit. We don't have any money, right? Because they'd show the books, and everybody would look at the books and like, oh, God, you don't have any money. There'd be this big debate. It would go back and forth. But really, they had a big chunk of change that they were using for these other things, right? The other set of books, right, which they basically were able to kind of you know, because they have a bank, right, with that money, that $200,000 they can put in a safe somewhere or buried into the ground. They got put in a bank account. So it actually existed in some place. So they could go to their creditors, right? So instead of showing that, oh, we're in crisis, they could go to their creditors, right, who they have to go to get kind of good credit scores and all this other kinds of stuff. And they can say, look, we're rolling in it. We're rolling in the black, right? So we deserve an A+ credit rating. And the creditors would look at it and like, oh yeah, look at this. This is great. A+. So they could borrow more money. So that was like one end of things. The other thing is that because they didn't want to spend it directly from the university, so we started seeing these transfers that were going from the education budget, and were being transferred to the foundations, right? So and again, that was really hard to uncover. We thought it was transferred to foundations, and then the foundations would be using that as a way of kind of building these dorms or doing all this other kind of stuff outside the public eye for the most part, because technically they were independent. And what clued us in on this at Kutztown was the fact that once there was a legal case at East Stroudsburg, right, a journalist kind of brought this forward, wanted to see these books, a legal case that basically kind of exploded what was happening here, but this kind of like, you know, behind the scenes collaboration between the university and the foundation. They said, no, there needs to be this separation. There was a court case and all this kind of stuff. Then we saw this big transfer of money, right, from Kutztown University to the foundation. And we're like, what's going on with that? And it turns out that it wasn't a special, like, big, like, amount of money that's pushed. It was actually, had it always been there, but it hadn't been accounted for in that way. So it wouldn't show up in the book. So it appeared like, oh, there's a little money going back and forth here. And then, whoa, there's a big transfer. Then it disappears. No, it was just as the first time they were required to report it. Another, and I'm not going to go into this now, another thing that was happening because they needed these good credit ratings so that they could get kind of bonds for this stuff. The bonds were being taken out by the foundations, right? And to build these kind of like, you know, big dorms and all this other stuff. And why I call off balance sheet financing here too as well is because what was happening is that they were building this, they were spending all this money to kind of build these special dorms and kind of like elaborate luxury kind of like gyms and workout spaces and suites and all this other kinds of stuff. They were taking all this stuff, they were incurring all this debt that was not being represented or not being kind of shown on the university's own ledger, right? But was nonetheless accumulating at the Pasci level, right? And so anyway, so you had this kind of debt, all this debt started kind of being incurred and eventually did have an impact. But anyways, so that's a long way around. So what you see happening here at Westchester University, and I'm, you know, maybe we even have David Backer back on the show, or maybe some of the students who are organizing around this to talk about this in more detail, because it's what's unclear to me at this point. This is just because this is new for me. It's not. It was unclear as like, is this a like a return to these practices, or did the practices never end? Right? Did this kind of like, you know, shady financing stuff kind of never end? I don't know. We'll just see. Anyways, so do check that stuff out. Last thing I thought was pretty cool. Temple University launched this new Center to Combat Racism, Anti-Semitism, LGBTQ, bigotry, and xenophobia. Very, very pleased to see that. Check out, there's a good article over the Bucks County Beacon about this, which is what we need to see more of, certainly. Let me just tell you. Yeah. But anyways, that's kind of what we got for today. So I think that, you know, I wanted to give you kind of some updates and kind of some bigger picture ways of kind of closing things out today. So we'll do another show next Friday. And that will be that one will be our last one of the year. But we will have on Monday at 7 p.m. Will be our last Out to Coop Live. And again, Cyril Mikaleko will be our guest for Monday. And we're going to kind of talk about what's happening, what had happened in the past year, kind of looking back, then looking forward, looking at some of the stuff that's happening over the Bucks County Beacon. There's just been an explosion of kind of reporting and It's really, Bucks County Beacon is becoming a go-to place for really tracking a lot of the extremism that is happening, not just here in our communities, but across the country. And you may have noticed this already, is that we've kind of got a little bit of a kind of collaborative work that's going on. For example, one of the things that I'll frequently do too is that I'm kind of checking things out, what reporting that they're having over at the Beacon, and looking to bringing some of those folks on as guests to the show. Remember, Raylan Robeson was on a couple weeks back, and I first learned about her through Jenny Stevens, did a report on what they're doing. To kind of monitor social media for extremism and misinformation and disinformation, right? So Campus Compact, she works with Campus Compact and stuff like that. So things like that, right? And then the reverse is also true. There's been people that we've had on this show that then go on and kind of articles will be taken up. They'll bring them on to write an article for the Bucks County Beacon, and hopefully we're going to see even more of this kind of collaboration across the county, across the region, of the kind of independent media spaces. And I learned the burnt hand teaches best, I guess they say, is that several years ago, I had actually, set up a nonprofit. It was called the Citizen Media Center. And the idea was to be a kind of hub for both training for independent journalists, but as a way of helping fund independent media projects, but also as this networking space for existing independent media stuff. So I've always felt that it would be really critical to have, some kind of, say, nonprofit like center whose goal was not to do the reporting, not to do the analysis, but was to kind of help coordinate and facilitate communication among kind of like independent media, independent progressive media, right? But at the time it was like, okay, yeah, great concept and stuff, but we just did not have the depth of the labor to be able to accomplish what originally we're setting out to do, for a lot of complicated reasons. So this time around, the Bucks County Beacon is just like, a beacon, to say the least, for kind of independent media around here and some of the reporting they're doing. And so to see this kind of relationship develop, a little bit more organically. I mean, Cyril and I have been talking about independent media for years now, and so the fact that he's over there at the Bucks County Beacon as the editor in chief is phenomenal. The reporters they got on, the staff they have over there are fantastic. And then we're seeing some other independent media emerge too as well. So hopefully we're going to be able to even do more together in the way that we have been. Right. I think that, it's going to be really important moving forward to think strategically about building our infrastructure, but in concrete ways. How can we take a baby step in one direction? Now, if you remember last year, one of the things that I really wanted to do last year, and Cyril and I had talked a little bit about this, was to do like an independent media kind of gathering or summit or something like this last summer, and for a bunch of reasons that didn't happen. A lot of that had to do with, my schedule was crazy, trying to coordinate with me and Cyril and a bunch of stuff. It just was like, when to find time to do these things, right? Especially as there was so much work that was moving forward for the midterm elections. So a lot of complicated reasons, but that idea is still kind of there about how do we begin to coordinate. Coordinate's the wrong word. It's like more like, how do we see these various independent media sites that are already existing? How do we see each other as resources, right? As places of mutual aid in this kind of independent media ecosystem. And that seems to be very important for, at least for my sanity, right? Because so much of the time, the work that we do in spaces like here, Raging Chicken, what they do at Bucks County Beacon, there's the Con O show, right? You hear me talk about Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast, and Rick Smith, who's been around doing just amazing work for the longest time, is that one of the things that we all can tell you is that is most of us, and most of the time, we're operating on pretty much shoestring budgets, right? That's kind of some of the nature of the work. Most of the independent media sites we have are labors of love, right? They're not for-profit centers, right? Where you're raking in kind of like tons of cash. You're not looking to get rich. You're doing it because you believe how important it is. Um, and the distinction that we always have between the right and the left is the right wing has, say, billionaires who understand building political infrastructure, whereas the left tends not to have billionaires who have that same mentality, right? The left has its billionaires, don't get me wrong, but they don't have that idea about building infrastructure, right? The investment is more on kind of specific issue-based projects as opposed to building a broad-based infrastructure. What I've always done with Raging Chicken, and why we even started Raging Chicken from the get-go, is we feel you needed to have these spaces that allows for shows like this one, right? Allows for the kind of reporting you see at the Bucks County Beacon, right? Is not to be kind of like the PR wing of this organization, but is rather to be a space where we get to hear from a whole range of organizations, right? Do we get to kind of amplify, right, and report on and highlight the work that's already going on, right? That's part about building that infrastructure. It takes time, right? Rick Smith, if you ever listen to Rick Smith's show, look at the work you do. By all objective measures, right? The work that Rick has done over the years has been like crazy successful, right? Off the wall successful. I mean, it would be like a model to show. Like now he's got like he's like on free speech TV. He's got national audiences. He's syndicated nationwide. All this other kind of stuff, and yet every single week is a challenge to make sure that you have funding to keep the thing going. If Rick Smith was on the right wing, right, there would be billionaires lining up to dump hundreds of thousands of dollars in his coffers, right? On the left, we end up getting in this kind of like political infighting and turf battles, right? So that everybody's poor, right? It's well, no, you blah blah, like you're in competition with each other. It's really wild. It's really wild because the left often talks about like collectivity and kind of working collaboratively and all this other kind of stuff, but we act completely the opposite of that, right? We act in terms of like in competition with each other, in kind of turf battles over things, in kind of personality conflicts, and rarely do we build organizations that function. Now that's changing, I have to say. This past like 5, 6, 7 years or so, we begin to see this kind of this collaborative work, right? And I don't mean to say that everything is easier on the right, like they're all kumbaya on the right. They're not. But what they have over there is they have kind of like really egomaniacal people that have a particular kind of agenda, and they could just do it by kind of dumping money on a whole bunch of people, right? On the left, we kind of want to have this disagreement. And frankly, if your only goal is to kind of tax cuts for the rich and keeping America white, if those are your two primary agendas, you don't really have a lot of other things you have to worry about, right? For the rest of us, right, who are under the broad kind of like like progressive left kind of umbrella, you've got a lot of kind of complex complex, overlapping, and sometimes feeling at odds or filled with tension issues that we're trying to kind of like work together, right? This is why intersectionality becomes so important on the left, is really trying to you're building across really of differences and different histories and legacies of privilege and oppression and all that stuff, as you're trying to make sense of this stuff, right, and try to kind of put things forward. But also got lots of dogmatism too. So here's what it is. But anyway, so looking forward is like that's what I hope to really try to help cultivate. I mean, Cyril and we've already talked about some things. I mean, I'm going to do some I'm going to start doing some work for the Bucks County Beacon too as well, and we're going to continue to try to share contacts and resources as a way of kind of building that out, and hopefully bringing some more people into that conversation. So Cyril and I will talk a little about, maybe we'll talk about some of that stuff on Monday. We'll close it out on Tuesday. All right, we'll close it out next Friday for the year. One other thing, a show note too as well. I wanted to point out. I've gotten kind of several inquiries, or not several inquiries, several requests that we have Alyssa Bowen back on the show. Remember Alyssa Bowen? She works for True North Research. She's been on the show, I think, 3 times now, I want to say. Does amazing work on researching dark money and all this stuff. She just had another piece that came out in Truth Out about kind of, dark money and schooling and things like this, and public schools and all this stuff. Has an excellent piece. And so we're trying to jockey back and forth to see when she could come on the show, but our schedules are just not working out right now. I mean, it's, busy time of the year and all that kind of stuff. So Alyssa's going to come on the show in the new year. So we're going to have her on, and which I thought was actually kind of a cool thing to do, especially since we're kind of in school board election season, right? And to have her come back on to kind of set the tone for the new year as we start to focus on what's happening in some of the school boards, continue the organizing that's happening. So Alyssa will be back on the show. So I wanted everybody to know, especially those folks who reach out and said, hey, we should have Alyssa back on the show. We should have Alyssa Bowen back on the show. I agree with you 100%. And I heard you, and I just want to let you know that it was kind of the update. So we will have her on kind of in early January. Should be cool. Anyways, so that's going to do it for me today, folks. I've got a bunch of stuff I got to do. I've got some, again, straggler grades and stuff that I've got to grade and do all that kind of stuff. And it's a dreary day outside, and that always takes it out of me too as well. But I hope, as all of you are kind of closing in on the end of 2022 from your vantage points, I hope you will take the time just to kind of reflect on a lot of the amazing work from this year. Yes, there's been tons of challenges, and there will continue to be. There's been really significant material setbacks when you think about, say, Roe v. Wade, so on. But the organizing has been kind of impressive. And I think there's lots of possibilities going forward. So I hope you'll kind of recall all that too as well. And I also want to say that, I appreciate the hell out of everybody who's been part of this show, whether you're kind of part of our Twitter warriors who are always out there sharing the show, let other people know about it. And now we'll see what happens. Like, we'll still have our Twitter warriors. Are we going to have Mastodon warriors? I don't know. We're going to have some people over on Post, and it's really interesting what this is going to be like. But those folks who've shared the show, those folks who continuously, join us for our live streams on YouTube and kind of like it and share it, subscribe to us on YouTube. That's a huge deal. For those folks who are podcast listeners who are, sharing the podcast, letting other people know about this stuff, I can't tell you how important that is. If you're listening to us on our podcast, if you make sure you leave us that 5-star review, let other people know why you like the show. Make sure you're following us on subscribing to us on YouTube, because the more that you do that kind of engagement, it helps other people find the show. Right. As much as these kind of algorithms are kind of detrimental, it's also part of, the ways that we can kind of help bring up more people into this fight. Right. And help them hear about the amazing work that's going on. So I appreciate all of you who have been patrons to the show, who have supported us from the very beginning, or for the ones who have just joined this past week. You mean a heck of a lot to me. I tell you, it's been the one thing that's been keeping me going, I know, kind of over, these many years. So. Yes. Anyways, I'll leave it at that for now. We will be back on Monday at 7 p.m. with Cyril Michaleko, and we'll do a little kind of year-end, closing out the year, talk about where we've been and where we're going to go, and then we'll close out everything for the year on next Friday. So thank you all for tuning in today. This is Kevin Mahoney. I am the creator and founder of Raging Chicken. You can help support this show by heading on over to patreon.com/rcpress. You become a patron for as little as $5 a month. You help make this possible. Thank you all for all the work you're doing. And hopefully we'll get some sunny days or snowy days coming soon. For now, see ya. See ya!